And will I have folks to review a nice place to visit? I would have called it, doesn't look like hell to me, but that would have given it away. But, you know, the twist is not, work it out after about 5 seconds of meeting the guy, the guide. I'm just going to do
the twist is not much of a twist.
No.
I mean, I called it in a little over 5 seconds myself.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, I heard as much. But it can be interesting for discussions later on about what the various temperaments would consider hell to be. And the question for you, Jeff, later on, would you get bored after just 1 month of all of those chicks?
Not in a month. What a putz.
Yeah.
And if you get bored in a month of having anything you want, you're a boring person.
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, there's a lot of people who would say that's not exactly hell. But we can get into that later on about the artisan temperament, and you said yourself there's no point with gambling.
I have no problem talking about that. As Morgan and I had a discussion about the subject earlier in the week, specifically about the part of in Please Understand Me Too, where Kersey talks about artisans seeking risk.
Yeah.
And Morgan's obviously welcome to join us for that if he wants to, but if he doesn't, his main point was he said that he didn't see it as much risk seeking as opportunity seeking.
Mm.
And I was making the point that some people, like opportunities for risk. And so that was definitely illustrated in this episode, because when, in the part where he talked about, basically not being fun if he wins every time.
Yeah, because that's the thing, is that's the part of the gamble, of the edge of it, whether they could win or not. There's no gamble. Right, I'll try and do the voice. Portrait of a man at work. The only work he's ever done. The only work he knows. His name is Henry Francis Valentine, but he calls himself Rocky, because that's the way his life has been. Rocky and perilous and uphill at a dead run all the way. He's tired now, tired of running and or wanting, of waiting for the breaks that come to others but never to him, never to Rocky Valentine, a scared, angry little man. He thinks it's all over now, but he's wrong. For Rocky Valentine, it's just the beginning. Well, I mangled that a bit, but it was that line about and uphill at a dead run all the way was a little bit hard to say. After being shot to death by a policeman, petty thief Rocky Valentine revives to find himself unhurt in the company of a seemingly good-natured, white-haired fat man named Pip. Pip explains that he is Valentine's guide, and that he has been instructed to supply him with whatever he wishes. At first, Valentine is suspicious, to the point of shooting Pip point blank in the head. But when Pip isn't harmed at all by this, Rocky concludes that Pip must be his guardian angel, and he must be in heaven. Accordingly, he goes on a good time spree filled with gambling and beautiful women. The only problem is that everything is too good. Rocky wins at every game, and any woman he wants is his for the asking. All of this very quickly becomes insufferably stifling. Rocky pleads with Pip to be sent to the other place. With gleeful ferocity, Pip replies, "This is the other place." A scared, angry little man who never got a break. Now he has everything he ever wanted, and he's going to have to live with it for eternity in the Twilight Zone. Over to you, Jeff.
I think you would be able to read those things maybe if you slowed down a little bit, because I think the reason Serling can read them is that he goes slowly and tries to articulate every consonant. Really,
I will try that next time.
So yeah, just a tip, just a suggestion.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's a whole lot of stuff we could talk about on this, but it's we already mentioned that. I'm like thinking a month is is not much time to get tired of being able to do whatever you wanted. But I was expecting. I knew the twist of it being hell or whatever was not really much of a twist. I was thinking, how are they going to present it? As that there needs to be um, some other caveat besides just boredom, And I understand. A long time ago, Amber, who went by Pneumoceptor on YouTube, and I
Yeah.
discussed this in the very first Faith and Type video that I did. So if anyone wants to check out my channel, the SP Spaz, and look at the Faith and Type series, the first one, we talked about this concept of the idea of getting, even if it was heaven, whatever the afterlife is, the idea of getting bored, with being living for all eternity. And so I don't remember obviously my exact words about that, but I do know that I understand the concept of getting bored with eternity. But I also know there's just so many unknowns and so many things that I've never done and never even fathomed that it would take a really long time. Even if that's really what the afterlife was, being able to experience whatever human enjoyment or pleasures that exist. The idea that it would just be this, I'm an impatient guy, but a month, it's like, it's one thing if they came back and were like, he's been there for years and years and years and years, because they've done, there's been movies and TV shows that have done that concept before. I mean, like Groundhog Day, the movie, where he lives the same day over and over again. That was a lot more, talk about going nuts, a lot more potential for that because he doesn't have the choice of setting up everything the way he wants it. He has a choice of what he does in that day, but everything is basically, it's just repeating the same setup. And the only things that change are the things that he deliberately changes himself. So even that, he found ways to use that day in all kinds of different things, the concept of like all of these different ways that he would try out to, including getting out of it, like trying to get himself dead in every possible way. So, it would, so from, production wise, just as an episode, it's very enjoyable because it's fun and funny. But there's not enough of a real reason to feel like this guy's really gone nuts after this time. There needed to be something more dark, I think, to the concept other than just he's going to be bored for eternity or whatever. Because there's just so many ways to avoid that.
Yeah, it was almost as if it was made for a certain kind of audience that was a bit religious and didn't like that much fun anyway. And could say, you can't have too much fun there, Timmy.
I would say I don't necessarily think the concept of being religious is antithesis to fun, but I get your point in terms of, and obviously, they're limited by their time slot and not being able to spend as much time with, and of course the network standards of what they can show him doing.
I like how they sometimes go up against that with a little wink to the audience. Is there anything I can do for you? And it's like they know the censors there. No, Dad, there's nothing you can do for me. I can't think of a single way you can entertain me.
Yeah. So
I liked how the actress played that. Like, go on.
Yeah, so it's really entertaining, but it still feels lacking in a certain way of needing something that was a little bit more sinister in the concept. That's just my viewpoint. But
also, we could say something about, I would say, if they I mean, there was a big contrast between this character and how he was characterized, how he was written, compared to the Bowley Jackson in the previous episode, where there was more depth to that character. And I think there's not that much they could have done with the plot, but they could have made him a more. But it's sort of the. I think one of the problems is that they sort of have to make him bad in quotation marks in order for it to say that he is in hell. But
yeah, and I think that you talk about that, they're going to make the character kind of shallow in terms of their, like, basically he's defined just by this. Then I think a character like that would not have gotten bored that quick. Because,
no,
you know, the idea is that, you know, if he's given all these things he never had in life, you know, he's going to enjoy that a lot longer. And they didn't really bring up any of the ideas of what would be missing from that. You know, they make it just as he's saying he's bored. I mean, really, is he going to say after I'm bored, so I want to go to hell? If this was like, really? Because if some people's concept of hell is like eternal torture,
yeah,
you know, he really
that's
thinks
mine.
that's going to be better.
What I would have done is I would have done more stuff with the interaction with the women, to like, and he maybe tries to wish for a woman to be a challenge, and he can't get a woman who's a challenge. Maybe more stuff with the interaction with the women.
You know, the idealists are watching this crying out like, what about love? You know, there's no mention of love. And I'm not saying it had to be in a schmaltzy way, but, you know, some kind of, and again, you mentioned, you know, religious ways. Obviously, they're not trying to offend their audience when it comes to too many specific references to that, but also, you know, the idea of hell in a lot of people also is the idea of separation from God. So even if you didn't specifically make it about God, you could still say that, you know, basically it's emptiness in whatever, you know, way that you're not, you know, rather than it's like you're being catered to in this way, because, and also the concepts introduced when he talked about like what's in exchange. You know, there is a very old thing of like the devil being this. There's always a catch to everything. Yeah. There always is a deal. So there could have been something in that direction where there was something else, you know, that was, I don't know. So it's like enjoyable, like I said, but it felt like there was a little bit missing in that area. So, and as I've said, you know, if I'm just thinking of it in terms of putting myself in the position, you know, then I'm like, I would have done so much better than he did. You know?
Yeah, exactly.
I would have had a lot more fun.
Yeah.
Because I would have actually gotten bored quicker with the winning at the gambling every time.
I mean, I got an idea what
the things like that. I would have already made it more interesting. You know, I would have found my own. I wouldn't have been that devoid of inspiration that I couldn't come up with ways to make those things more fun and exciting myself. You know?
What they could have done is they could have done a bit more setup to show that he was part ladies' man and that he liked the challenge of chasing women.
Yeah,
and
he didn't mention that, but it's still like, you know, you would have liked to have seen like it seemed like the focus was a little bit off, like a little bit all over the place. When you have that limited time, you have to kind of rein in a little bit and focus on one or two things and really, you know, go that direction. And they didn't seem to be able to quite make up their mind what they wanted to do with that.
We might have had the same slot machine that was in that previous an episode of a while back.
Oh, the one in Vegas or whatever.
Yeah. And they said that they had to be under armed guard.
Well, yeah, and that's a good example, because even though, here's the funny thing, overall this episode was probably more entertaining than that one to me, but that one at least had a stronger antagonist.
Yeah.
So even though I thought it got a little bit silly, at least it was like there was a real threat. Whereas in this one, it's like you never really see it. You know, it ends with a dude laughing. It's like, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I like the fact that they've got the slot machine Dalek thing
Yeah,
in that one.
but I
Uh,
mean, there's definitely ways I think that could have introduced concepts that would have made the audience feel more like this guy's eternity is really going to be hell, as opposed to just he's gonna get bored.
yeah, I think if they had have made the character a little bit less, a little bit more rounded out, and maybe revealed later on that he'd done something bad, and they could have shed a little bit more of him as like, yes, he was a thief, but maybe like did these other things, and on a positive note. And there was a little bit they could have done, like where he wanted to see certain ones of his contacts, if not friends. So I think they could have done more with the characterization to sort of hide the fact that he was in hell.
Yeah, I mean,
Right.
if that's really all the twist is going to be, then you have to do more in that direction. But I personally, I would have preferred it if they just introduced something else. You know, if they the focus cause about that he never felt like anyone loved him or anything like that. And then
Ah,
if you go in went in that direction, then you could make it feel like he's more of this empty eternity as opposed to
right.
just being the shallow guy gets bored, because then it's like, well,
Right.
no, the audience isn't really feeling for him in that slot. I think I'm probably far from the only one that is thinking, hey, I'll take his place if he doesn't like it.
That you're absolutely right there, Jeff, because it's established as a guy that wants things on a sensory level rather than an emotional level. When he gets it on a sensory level, whereas if he wants something on an emotional level, but he's not really getting it on an emotional level, that's a bigger contrast. So you're right about that. That would have been a better way to do it.
Yeah, because he said the things about in a way, it sort of takes that concept that Kersey talked about of boredom being like the worst thing for artisans, but in a sense, it isn't really the worst thing. It's just the worst thing, to feel like you don't have freedom to do anything. That's the kind
Right.
of boredom it is. Is basically when you're constrained. Now they did have the one thing when the guy's laughing, he can't get out the door. That's the thing that's more like the episode with the guy on another planet, who's being on display in the zoo or whatever. If they
Right.
had that established where like he has this everything he wants, but then it's shrinking in on him in some way, like he's losing these abilities. Like I said, there's different ways you could have done it, but just needed a little bit more in that direction to really
Mm.
really feel like he's in a bad place, as opposed to just dude says he is and laughs. It's kind of an abrupt and not really a twist, because it's like all that you see coming. It's just a matter of how they're going to do it, and it's not done really satisfyingly. I'll put it that way.
In terms of the language, I like the fact when the guy said, "I want a chick that won't quit," and then like
Mm-hmm.
very carefully around the language said, "I mean like stacked."
Yeah, yeah. I was
Uh,
actually a little surprised that they left in him doing the hand gesture.
yes.
Because even that, in those days, the censors could have been like, "No, you can't do that." Uh, and I did think the first the blonde chick was pretty cute that he got.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so he has fairly good taste in that area. Not in suits or ties though.
Yeah. So apparently, Charles Beaumont wanted to have Rod Serling himself play the part. So, Jeff, do you want to read this through?
Do I want to read it through? What do you mean by that?
Okay,
You
could
mean
you
out
read it
loud?
through? Yes, could you read it out loud, please?
Okay. Charles Beaumont's fourth and final first season entry was his weakest. It's basically a prolonged one-liner. However, as regarded the casting of the lead, Beaumont had something truly original and bizarre in mind. That seems like bad grammar to me, but maybe I'm reading it wrong.
Mm.
He wrote Serling, "I've had an absolutely screwball idea. Your first reaction will be one of dumb astonishment, followed by rapid blinking and fantods."
I don't know what that is.
I don't know what that is either. if for any reason we can't get Mickey Rooney for The Other Place, the script's original title, why don't you essay the role of Rocky yourself? And then it just repeats in parentheses what he said. When I mentioned it to Helen, she said, well, now he'll think you consider him the cheap crook type. I cuffed her lightly about the ears, explaining that if I know writers, it's a good bet old Rod has the same secret ambition I do. To wit, to act. We're all hams in our own ways, each of us planning to write himself into a part someday. Is it not so? My opinion is that it would be a lot of fun all around, but if you can indeed act, you'd be keen in the role, and that the concomitant
Concomitant.
concomitant. I don't
Yeah.
know what that word means either. Publicity would be unbad. I'm like, what language is this guy speaking?
Yeah, concomitant is something that naturally follows along with.
I like unbad though. That's great.
Yes, yes. Oh, nice understatement. Unbad.
I'm thinking this guy is a little bit trying to be. I'm gonna dazzle you with my vocabulary too.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I don't really have any particular comment on Serling playing the character, but Serling passed on the idea, instead casting Larry Blyden. Unfortunately, Blyden's performance seriously mars the episode. I disagree with that. I don't think
Yeah, that's the
there was
way.
anything wrong with his performance, really. Although he is likable, his broad portrayal of Valentine comes across like a third-rate composite impression of James Cagney, Edward G. Robinson, and George Raft. I really have only seen one of those and not that much, so I certainly can't say that it comes across that way to me. But to me, it's not really his fault. The writing
Yeah.
makes him the shallow
Yep.
character. There's not really much he can do with that. Like,
Yeah.
you know, if they don't give him lines to say that give him more emotion or more depth, like you said, there's not really much he can do with that. I mean, all he can do is like a facial expression, you know, look like he's about to cry or something. But it's like they haven't given him reason to do that. So
Yeah.
I don't fault his performance for that.
So you might agree with Buck Houghton here.
Buck Houghton feels the material dictated Blyden's approach. Yeah, I agree. You have to do something extravagant to keep it from just laying there. If he had just gone for it and said, gee, that's a great broad, you mean she's mine, it would have been about as interesting as yesterday's fish. But he said, hoo boy, really? Ha ha. It may not have been the right thing to do, but it was something to do. Yeah, as I said, I don't fault his performance. Like, that's when you give him that, that's what he's going to do. So,
Yeah.
you know, there's only so much you can do with it. They didn't give. Yeah, I agree with what you said about Boley Jackson in the previous episode. That they, even in that short a time, they still gave him the philosophy and the presentation. I'm giving you time to change your page so we don't have that.
Right.
It said something about the saving grace in the episode. Malevolent performance of Sebastian Cabot as Pip, Valentine's guardian angel. This part demanded a great sacrifice of Cabot, though. His black hair and neatly groomed black beard were among his trademarks, but they just wouldn't do for a character presumed to be an angel throughout most of the show. His hair would have to be white. Now, see, that's something they could have done that would have punched it up, I think, if they had him start that way and then he changes to the dark.
Ah.
So they could have had him, in that last scene. I still think there needed to be more of a twist, but at least if you suddenly switch to his features, become darker, then you've at least given a little bit of punch to it.
Yeah.
That was quite a chore. Buck Houghton remembers it's very hard to whiten hair. What they usually use is thinned zinc oxide, and it looks like thinned zinc oxide. It's bad. And yet this fellow had to have white hair. It really made a big difference. And what they do to really make it white is they bleach it, and it ain't very good for your hair. We really had to talk Sebastian into doing it because then he had to be white hair for 3 months until it grew out. That was a major task again to do that. Yeah. Have you heard of wigs, folks? It seems like they would have had the budget to have the wig, and that would have made the transition if they had him switch to dark a lot easier. Maybe you would have had to still do with the eyebrows or something, but it still I think would have been possible. So doesn't sound like they thought that one out very well.
Yeah, well, I mean, previous episodes they were a lot better with the makeup, like the one where they did the guy when he aged, and that was clever. The way they did it with they put various lines on his face, and then they changed the kind of lighting to see whether it shows. It looked like wrinkles will appear on his face. But I give this one 7 out of 10, and one of those points is for the chicks.
Is there more to that book entry, or is that the end?
That's the end. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, did you have anything to say about that concept I talked about the artist and risk taking? Morgan left, so he's not here to discuss it.
Yeah, I think that'd be very. I get the imagine that if there's no risk, there's no fun in it. There's not the doubt, the anticipation, the excitement aspect to it. The what did I call it? The suspense, anticipating the result.
Yeah, and that's kind of the point I made to him, is that, okay, all things being equal, if you said, there's a level to it. Like you said, okay, you can have all the money that you want, set up the ideal situation. So, like, if it's a gambling situation, if it's a card game or whatever, you're going to win. Is that fun? Well, it still can be if nobody else knows you're going to win.
Ah, yes.
And that's part of what he said in this episode. The character said that, if he was going to rob a bank, if everybody knew I was going to do it, then that's not as exciting, because the whole point is the risk factor. The fear of getting caught makes it the adrenaline rush more. If you know ahead of time that there's no way that you're going to have real consequences, then you don't get that same thrill. Now, I still think there are some basic physical pleasures that it doesn't really matter whether you know it's coming or not. You could still enjoy quite a bit, but I don't know that for sure.
Yeah.
I don't know if I really knew that I could have whatever I wanted and there was no thrill of not necessarily thrill of the chase, but thrill of the setup in any way where it was unknown, that basically was entirely my choice, whether that would be as exciting. Because I've made the point that artisans need boundaries, because if you don't have boundaries, then you have nothing to push against.
Yep.
And our whole lot in life, or our whole role, is to push against boundaries and walls and things. And if you don't have that in the first place, then it may not be. So, I made this point when I was talking a few years ago about Charlie Sheen, because he had this kind of period of time where people were making a big deal of a so-called public breakdown or whatever about all these things in his life, and in itself there wasn't really anything special about that, and he's like a million other people. It's just that because he was very much in the public eye, people made a big deal of it. But the whole point is, like, the way that he arrived at where he was in life was because he was somebody that basically could have anything he wanted.
Yeah.
He grew up in an environment where, he never wanted for money, was given opportunities in the acting business because of his family and what he was in. And, he basically could have whatever relationships with women that he wanted. It's like everything was basically handed to him on a silver platter. And he got messed up on drugs and other things like that. But even through all that, it was like people wanted to be like, oh, this particular situation is a crisis for what he's going through now. But it really isn't. It was just the next chapter of his life. And he, in interviews, was basically saying, like, I'm still just enjoying my life the way I always have. But, I may have made some bad choices that maybe I'll not do again. But I'm, so it's like, that to me was very, like, I don't know what the word is, like, educational is not exactly it, but if people really realized what was going on there, instead of trying to make it something it isn't, then I think they would understand artisans better. There's people that are like songwriters and stuff like that I think have done a good job sometimes in sort of illustrating the artisan mentality in a way that's very, like, self-aware, that kind of, if you really paid attention to it, you could learn something from it. But of course the problem is that the only ones who truly understand are other artisans, because they feel those exact same things. I feel like Pink is an artist that's like that. And I'm not a huge fan of hers, but she has several songs where I think when I hear the lyrics, I'm like, this is a perfect explanation. Like she really puts it in ways that I'm like, yes, that's exactly what it's like, you know? And so, but the problem, of course, is like I said, the other temperaments are always viewing it through their lens.
Yeah.
So they're always like, in the case of the intuitive types, they're usually trying to attach motives or things to it that aren't actually there,
Yep.
taking it in a different direction of assumptions. And really, Guardians are doing the same thing. Just it's much more. I guess really it seems like that they're all doing that in terms of they're all like saying, this is how it seems to me. This is how this person needs to change to be more like my temperament.
Yeah.
Even if they don't consciously say that or think that, it's the basic idea behind. And I may be biased again through my temperament lens, but I feel like artisans are the only ones who don't do that, where we're not trying to change everybody into us because we
But
want to be unique.
but you would call, I mean, like in the 60s they would call the SJ squares. Oh, don't
Well,
be
that's what I'm
square.
saying. Yeah, okay. So you do have people who will say things like, "Oh, you need to lighten up and have some fun," things
Yeah.
like that. But the honest truth is, like I said, we can say that, but we really don't want everybody to do that because then they steal our thunder. Like if there
Right.
aren't the boring people, then we don't seem exciting in comparison to them. So, I would say more immature artisans may have that view of, oh, it would be great if everybody just had fun and did whatever they wanted all the time. There was a Simpsons episode about that where they had this thing they called the Do What You Feel Festival, because
Ah.
it was all based on the fact that Bart was asked by this like psychologist, self-help kind of guy, well, what do you think would make life better or and he said, just basically do what you feel, and it was a great, because Simpsons has several episodes that do a great job of having one temperament's ideal taken to its extreme and why it doesn't work, why
Mm.
it always needs to be checked by the others. Um, and that was a really good one for artisans. There's a lot of them because there's been so many Simpsons episodes, but and you have both Homer and Bart as main characters that are both different artisan types. So, but that to me was a good example of that. As if when you have everybody just does what they feel, not only does society break down, but the artisans themselves are not going to enjoy themselves as much, because then it's like you've taken away the thing that our role in society, what we exist for, and so what I don't know, I said all that, I guess, is kind of convoluted way to get back to that. If I was in this situation where I really had whatever I wanted, would those feelings within me that make it exciting to do those things, would they start to fade because of that knowledge that there is no real risk or consequences? If everything is just pure pleasure, I still think it would take way more than a month, but would there eventually reach a point in which it was all empty feeling? And I think, yes, probably that they would. But I still have enough confidence in myself. I feel like I could keep it up for quite a long time of finding things to do that would not be boring. So, because in a sense, that's what I already do in my own life. You know, it's just I adjust to the parameters that I've been given. So,
When you were talking about right at the beginning of your section there, when you were talking about about would you do it if you knew you were going to win? I mean, you both like to watch something live, and you like to watch previous sporting events of where you know what the result's going to be. So, what's that
right.
like for you as a different
That's
experience?
excellent question, because here's the funny thing. I'm really glad you brought that up, because I can watch sports events from the past, know the outcome, and still find myself rooting for the opposite result to happen. And so even though I know, no matter what, how much I feel like, oh, I want the other team to win, it's guaranteed that the team that won the first time is going to win again when I watch it on a replay. But I'll still feel that way. So being fully having the knowledge of I know what the result will be, and I still enjoy watching it, and still enjoy sort of rooting for the opposite event to happen. So even that, yeah, would I eventually get bored with that? Probably so. But it would still take a while. And it's like, if I had the power to actually change the result of the old event and see a different ending, then that would be a lot of fun. And it would be fun, I think I had talked about this before, to see just what other things would change based on the results of that sporting event. Because as I mentioned before, there's so many ways that those things affect other stuff, you know,
So
from
if you,
individuals to larger society.
it would be interesting if you were made God. Like you wouldn't get bored, but you also, I don't think you'd take it too far. The power wouldn't go to your head, but
Yeah, well,
it'd be
there's all
interesting what
the
you would do.
yeah. I don't have the Davros mentality of
Yeah.
like ultimate power is the number one goal. Like that in itself seems boring to me. But having power to do things that I would find enjoyable, then yeah, I would love to do that. But it's not, they explore that concept in the movie Bruce Almighty, where he's given God powers for, but even that, they're still actually limited. Like the God in the movie tells him he has all of his powers, but he really doesn't, because if he actually did, there would be things that would have gone even more extreme than they did. But again, because of they want it to be an entertaining movie and a comedy and not super dark, uh, they didn't take all those things to their extremes. Um, but they did explore some of it. They had things like he pulls the moon closer to make it more romantic for him and his girlfriend, and that causes like tsunamis across the other side of the earth and stuff like that. So a bunch of people are having their lives ruined and possibly lost because he had this whim to do this thing. Um, so that's the kind of thing that could be explored.
Um,
Uh, what are the ramifications of what are the consequences of this? But when you create the entire fantasy world, such as in this episode, then there are no real consequences, so you don't even have that to think about.
I think, I mean, in the past, it's been a bit of a cliched question to ask, what would you do if you were God for the day, or what would you do if you were God? But I actually think that might be quite a good question to like to sort of see the temperament patterns
Mm-hmm.
involved, and to then, and in the light of knowing about typology, then following up on what these people really want. And imagine, it'd just be interesting to imagine what the NFs would say in that
Yeah.
situation if they were God.
The thing is, I think a lot of NFs will be able to come up with an answer to that quicker, maybe, than anybody else, but then they would change their mind. Because as soon as they started thinking about what would happen based on the first things they chose, then they would be like, well, I'd have to. So they might actually drive themselves crazy and their head explode. I could see NTs doing that also, just in different ways, because there are NTs who feel like if everything just ran to maximum efficiency, or in my way of doing the system, then everything would be great. But then they would start to see uh, the problems caused by that, and then have to correct those problems, and it become this never-ending flow chart.
Yeah, well, I mean,
Instead of
I
how
sort of
you
I give up
NTs
after a
love to
certain
flow.
point. I give up after a certain point
Yeah.
because I'm more interested in sort of fun stuff.
Well, yeah, and
Um,
that's why I say that to me it feels like the NFs have this tremendous burden on them, because every time those concepts where they're talking about basically the Atlas idea, the whole world on their shoulders kind of thing. They're feeling the pain of all of these things, that they can't fix or can't make right. And the reason why artisans don't tend to feel that way is because we don't view it the same way. It goes back to that cynical optimism thing. It's like, oh
yeah,
yeah, right now there's somebody suffering horribly in the world, but there's nothing I can do about that. So I'm not going to sit here crying all day because of it.
yeah,
It doesn't mean I don't have compassion. It doesn't mean that I'm pro suffering. That I want somebody to be tortured or be in horrible pain right now. I don't. But I realize it's happening somewhere right now, and there's nothing I can do about it. So I'm not going to like sit here wailing about the injustice in the world because it exists, because that there's not anything right this second I can do about
Now,
it.
I will say, folks, Jeff doesn't talk about it a lot, but you do, I think you still sponsor 2 children. Is that right?
It's down to one now. They
Right.
ripped the other one away from me, and I don't want to get into that. I'll
Right.
get too emotional myself, but yeah, it's down to one, and he's actually an adult now, but I still continue to sponsor him. He's Morgan's age, so he just turned 20, and I think if I read right, it's supposed to last until he's 21. So at that point, I'll have to decide whether I want to try to do somebody else, but I haven't at this point. But
Right.
anyway, yeah, because I don't do that to be a thing to like brag about or something. You know, it's just to me, it's just doing my part in a way. You know, and
Yeah.
obviously, there's plenty of people could say, well, there's all these other things you could do, and that's true. You know, I don't follow the ultimate, Jesus example of selling everything and giving it to the poor. You know, I've never done that. So if somebody wants to accuse me of being selfish or being a hypocrite about any of that, then go ahead. You know, I would acknowledge that and not even get upset at them for saying that, because I'm not some ultimate example of self-sacrifice. There's plenty of luxuries in my life that I don't go without. But there's also plenty of things that I don't feel the need to do. And people who have been poorer than me in terms of their income, who have spent money in a way that I personally wouldn't, that I think is wasteful. So, there are people that always thought, well, they've got to have the more expensive shoes, or they've
Yeah.
got to have. There's now, of course, a lot of technology. People, like, they have to get the new iPhone when it comes out, or all of these things like that, and they focus around that. And some of those people might have less money than me and not have some of the comforts I have, but they have that instead. So it's like a
Yeah.
matter of priorities.
Yeah.
I've never felt like I had to have the newest technology when it came out. I still use plenty of new technology, but it's not. I don't feel it a need, and I feel like if yesterday, I lived a certain way, and then today, and then tomorrow, like if tomorrow everything that I have as a luxury item was all taken away from me, yeah, it would suck temporarily, but I would still adapt to it, and I would
Yeah.
still go on living my life. I wouldn't act like those things are what defined me or my life. So it's like I can enjoy what I have in life in terms of luxury items, things that aren't actually needs, and still realize that that's not what life is all about exactly. So
Jeff. Yeah. Go on.
two things I'd say about that. Number one is that I'm currently in the middle of a fast, and that's a thing where there's people that say, oh, somebody can't go without food for, more than a certain amount of time. They'll be like, there's people who haven't eaten for a day or 2 days or whatever, that because they don't have any food, don't have the ability. Well, I've gone 44 hours now without any actual calories, but I'm not doing that because I have to. I'm doing it because there's health benefits to it that I'm trying to take advantage of. So it's a choice. So it's fasting, not starvation. There's a difference
Right.
between the two. But I'm gonna say one more thing, and then I'll bring it back to this episode, and so we can close. That I there are people a lot of people talk about privilege. It's become kind of trendy to talk about privilege as if
Yeah.
people who have had privileges in their life can't understand suffering, can't understand poverty,
Yeah.
can't, because they've had privileges. The fact is, almost every human being who's ever lived has had some privileges. They've had some things that were not complete necessities in their life.
Yeah.
And it's just it's a big scale, from one to the other. But even the person who, in whatever you want to pick somebody out of history, that has been the wealthiest, that has been the most not wanting for anything in terms of they've still had things in their life where they felt empty, they felt, unloved, or wanting for something. There's no perfection that's really there, no matter what so-called privilege that you think somebody has. And that's definitely true when you talk about people growing up always think, oh, the popular kids in school, they don't have to worry about anything, just everything is perfect for them. Some of those kids that are viewed as the popular kids, they may actually feel worse about themselves and hide that than people who are not that way. So you never know. It's like everybody has experienced suffering. Everybody has experienced emptiness or loneliness or all of these things. It's not this. It's not just this either or thing defined by people of privilege and people that aren't. So I wanted to make that point and say that yes, it is the ultimate artisan dream in a way to be in the position that the character is in this episode, where it's like you can do whatever you want and have whatever pleasures you want. But again, like I said, in the real world, there always are boundaries to it, and that's part of what sort of puts us in that role. Um, so yeah, I definitely feel like watching this episode, I'm like, this would be a lot of fun, but I also understand the emptiness aspect. They just didn't really do as good a job at establishing that, and I don't blame the actor or even the director. I would blame the writing for not really being as comprehensive as maybe it should be.
Yeah. So yeah, there's the theme of chase versus enjoying the prize, and the chase being the thing. You said something early on about those people that have to have the best. Catherine Farber recently, we did a hangout, we did a Zoom event with her. It'll be on the channel in maybe about a week, where she talked about some of the Enneagram Type 3s. Like, they might only have a few things, but they want those few things to be the best. So even if they're quite poor, it's just like they have like say they might have a luxury handbag and not have anything much else. But it's like what little they do have, they want to be the best in order to keep presenting that image.
And personally, as an Enneagram Type 7, I feel like I would. Part of the reason why I wouldn't get bored after a month was that I would be like, no, I know no matter what I'm doing now, if I do get bored with it, I've got something else that I can look forward to. I've got something else that I can do, and it's infinite possibilities. So I really think, that again, it'll be interesting to explore that if that ever actually is the case, if the afterlife really is like that. But of course, I don't know that it is. But
and this could be an idea for your channel, Jeff. Like, what would be the ironic hell for each of the temperaments?
Yeah, maybe. I think I'm going to start, like, when I start doing videos again about type, which I want to do very soon when I get my technical aspects straightened out. I will going to start with the basics, and do a little bit more kind of not quite tutorials, but close to that in terms of, because I think I feel like there's and I said this in the video I recorded yesterday that I haven't uploaded yet, that I feel like there's sort of a lack of some information or misinformation, or people have confused what typology is. And, there's a whole lot of, in the community, I mean, just maybe the communities I happen to look at. But I mean, even when I see new YouTube channels that are talking about Myers-Briggs stuff, I feel like this is really taking things in the wrong direction, or at least not in a direction that is really helpful towards using those things for understanding. So anyway, so Ben said he gave this a 7. I will give it an 8, and join us next time for Nightmare as a Child.
Right, bye-bye, folks.
Bye.